Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air for the 14th week of 2013. Aware is the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook. The following is from the group Roots Action. You can find them on the web, Roots in the sense of grassroots. Roots Action has been an active anti-war group for some time. And they write this week, 40 months after President Obama received the Nobel Peace Prize, it's time for us to urge that the award be withdrawn. In December 2009, the top Nobel honor went to Obama amid high hopes that he would engage in pursuit of peace rather than war. But today there are more U.S. troops in Afghanistan than there were when Obama took office. His presidency has widened the use of drones and other instruments of remote killing in several countries. Perpetual war seems more perpetual than ever. He's simply lying to us when he says the war is winding down. He's expanded the war in Southeast Asia and Southwest Asia beyond AFPAC, the Afghanistan-Pakistan theater, and into Africa. From Afghanistan and Pakistan to the Middle East, Africa, and beyond, the president has stepped up air attacks and support for military assaults, undermining, in the hopeful words of the Nobel Committee as it awarded his Peace Prize, quote, efforts to strengthen international diplomacy and cooperation between peoples. In light of subsequent events, the Nobel Peace Prize was unwisely bestowed in 2009, in sharp contrast to how wisely it was bestowed in 1964, when Martin Luther King received the Peace Prize. Speaking in Oslo, Dr. King said then, quote, I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic stairway into a hell of thermonuclear destruction, close quote. He asserted that humanity must evolve a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. And that can happen now only by resistance to the Obama administration. In the words of Martin King, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. We are the terrorists far more than the people of the countries we've invaded. The program of the current administration consists of assassination, austerity, and anti-environmentalism, just as the 1% desire. Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana is made up of people who believe that if Americans actually knew what the U.S. government is doing in their name, they would be appalled. Tonight we'll have some comments on the war and the background to it, the interests involved in it, from members and friends of Aware, and then some videos on the same subject. But we'll start with Ron Zoke taunting the madman. And you're not talking about Mr. Obama in this case, right?
No, I'm talking about the succession of madmen we've been hearing about for years whenever there is a thrust toward war. And we can review the list, of course, Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein, another madman we identified and we had to overcome. In Iran, of course, we're hearing about Ahmadinejad and the Ayatollah, and in Syria, the regime there is being portrayed sometimes as being controlled by a madman. And of course, the one in the news the last few days, the North Korean leader or dictator or madman, as you prefer, Kim Jong-un, and the debate that's going on about whether they are rational. Now, what that seems to mean is that if they are rational, they would do a cost-benefit analysis and figure out that if they hit an American base, the American retaliation would destroy so much of North Korea that they wouldn't possibly do that. Others saying, no, he's a madman, and we must take immediate, strong measures to impress them with how strong and powerful and tough we are. And if they're really irrational, that will make no difference. But so do you think the North Koreans are rational, or their leader, or or is he simply a madman that no rational considerations will move? Well, we are moving into place a whole lot of war equipment. After accusing the North Koreans of engaging in provocations for days, the news stories making little of the fact that American troops and South Koreans were staging war games, always called routine annual war games, on the borders of North Korea. Then B-22 stealth bombers were flown, at least over South Korea. How far they went is not clear, but the story came out later that they were dropping dummy bombs on an uninhabited South Korean island. Many of those islands, by the way, are still in dispute because there never was a peace treaty, and you should think of that as a qualification on the stuff we're hearing that North Korea is saying it's in a state of war with South Korea. Well, it has been for some 60-some years because there never was a peace treaty concluded at the end of what we call the Korean War, which was never officially a war. It was only a police action. And it was kind of the opening move in the post-1945 American drive to essentially rule the rest of the world. And so American imperialism got its initial trial, some would say there, if you neglecting, that is, the westward movement of the USA itself from the eastern seaboard westward to California and Hawaii and the Philippines and all the rest. So these B-52s were flown from somewhere in mid-America, whether it was Missouri or Oklahoma, I'm not sure, nonstop round trip apparently to South Korea, according to some. But others say that American planes are being flown from Okinawa, you might ask what they're doing there, to South Korea, and then being flown over South Korea at least. Whether they're penetrating North Korean airspace is never specified. So we've had a flight of F-22 fighters since then as well. And always it is intimated that we're doing this to show the strength of our resolve and to increase the morale of our South Korean allies. But when North Koreans do these things, they are provocations, which must be met with preparations for the exertion of armed force. But when we do these things, it's just a tribute to our essential virtue and resolve to defend ourselves and our allies. In all of this, we never hear about whether North Korea has a right to defend itself, and indeed about the extreme dubiousness of the notion that there were ever two nations called North Korea and South Korea, one of which invaded the other, and so on. Same story with respect to Vietnam. There never was two Vietnams until a decision was made to divide the country in the 1950s, I believe. So does North Korea have a right to defend itself? And if you say yes, what are some implications of that? Is every move they make to acquire and deploy military equipment a horrible provocation? Or is it, as it would be on the American side, a wholly laudable and salutary attempt to prevent war by showing how strong and determined and they are. So take your choice and try to convince other people that you're on the right track. So U.S. deploys warship off South Korea amid soaring tensions on peninsula. Soaring tensions are there, but the USS McCain an Aegis-class guided missile destroyer has been deployed there, but they must not view that as an aggressive act. It's purely defensive. It would be aggressive only if they did it. North Korea, another headline, vows to keep nuclear arms and fix economy. So we are led to believe that this is a bad thing. Another headline, U.S. F-22 stealth jets join South Korean drills amid saber rattling. And the term saber rattling is being used a lot these days. And whether it's also being used for the South Korean and American side is left rather ambiguous at times. Going back to a column by Paul Krugman commenting on earlier wars and what led up to those wars, he said, what we should have learned from the Iraq debacle was that you should always be skeptical and you should never rely on supposed authority. If you hear that everyone supports a policy, whether it's a war of choice or fiscal austerity, you should ask whether everyone has been defined to exclude anyone expressing a different opinion. And policy arguments should be evaluated on the merits, not by who expresses them. Remember when Colin Powell assured us about those Iraqi WMDs. Unfortunately, Krugman says, we don't seem to have learned these lessons. Will we ever? So there's this need to personalize everything. And if we do it, of course, it's justified, if not completely virtuous. But if they do it, then of course it's entirely different matter. And the need to personalize all these things and to engage in the blame game means that we have to find someone to blame for all of these evil moves. And there's always a supposed madman around to paste these things onto. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ron. David, you got a response to the need to defend ourselves against madmen on the other side of the globe?
Well, when did North Korea become the 51st state? I mean, this is what always amazes me. What right does the 1% of this country, the corporate elites, think that they own the world? I mean, dictating terms to other countries of what they do as far as their internal affairs. And, let's just face the facts about North Korea. Is North Korea irrational? Well, I think if you look at the case of what's happened in recent history, the invasion of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, the destabilization and overthrow of Libya, and the current destabilization going on in Syria right now. I don't think when they look at this that there's nothing at all irrational about them. I mean, they're a very small country, and the only thing they've got going for them is that they do have nuclear capabilities. And like Iran in the Middle East, North Korea is one of the few countries in the world that the U.S. Pax Americana corporate empire does not either control or profit from. And that is really the bottom line issue here.
And they hit American bases from North Korea using the very limited missile technology that they have. And maybe so, if there are 700 American bases around the world, there's going to be one in range somewhere.
Conveniently in the neighborhood, yes,
right.
Exactly.
Yes, and of course, they never say, but they always sort of imply in the corporate news media here in the United States that North Koreans have, intercontinental ballistic missile capabilities that can hit the, continental United States. It is possible that they would have a missile that might be able to hit the Aleutian Islands off the shore of Alaska. I kind of doubt it. And there's no way that they have the capabilities to hit the continental United States. But the point is like Ron mentioned, is what do we expect when the people that control our country, not the American people, but the corporate elite, the 1%, who profit from these wars, who profit from these interventions, profit over the years, going back decades, of overthrowing democratically elected countries, of destabilizing countries in various economic and political ways, fomenting military coups, murder and assassination of leaders. What do people expect the reaction is going to be? the thing is that this whole North Korea boogeyman. I mean, we've seen it all before, as Ron stated. Where's the weapons of mass destruction? You know, never materialized. A total lie.
And if we think enough about American political history, well, in our lifetimes at least, we should remember things that have largely gone down the memory hole, like the fact that the representative liberal administration of the post-World War II world, that of John Kennedy, got elected by using a conscious lie about missiles and the possibility of the U.S. being attacked. Kennedy ran against the Republican administration, which was in office. The outgoing Republican president's vice president was his opponent. Kennedy ran against this administration by saying this administration had allowed a missile gap to develop. We're talking about the election of 1960. The missile gap was the Russians had more or better missiles than we did. Now, John Kennedy, and the people around him knew that that was a lie. They knew that wasn't true. Yet they used it throughout, and historians of the election of those long ago days say that was the reason John Kennedy got elected president. He was going to defend us against the dangers presented by the Soviet Union, which the outgoing Republican administration, or the incumbent Republican administration, was not willing to do. We're going to get this country moving again, said John Kennedy, moving again in its own defense and so forth. So, I mean, Krugman's point that you quoted, Ron, about we should never rely on supposed authorities on this, we'd have to underline the New York Times where Krugman was writing that,
Right.
of course. But it certainly is true when we look to liberal political figures who tell us how they're going to take care of us. Stress two particular reasons for a war scare right now. David's already mentioned one. That's the fact that we have a huge arms industry in this country, and they have to make sure their profits are up. And the difficulties are, if peace breaks out, there's the danger that we won't be buying things from Lockheed Martin quite as much anymore. And therefore, we got to make sure that those things continue to sit in the national budget. The stealth bomber that we've just sent halfway around the world to Korea does not fly for free. Those things are expensive, and a lot of people who are making a lot of money on it look at the stock market. There's a second reason for the war scare that I think we shouldn't discount. It's a distraction. The Obama administration did not do the one thing that it was supposed to do in the popular mind when it came into office. That is, deal with the economic crisis by establishing a decent jobs program, a serious jobs program, a program like the Works Progress Administration during the New Deal that would provide a job at a living wage for anybody who wanted one. They didn't do that. They never had any sense, any intention of doing that. And the reason being, as David pointed out, they're working for the 1%. Okay, the distress in this country continues to grow under the radar. The media don't talk about it, but people know what the real situation of their lives are, what the real situation of their jobs and their families' jobs are. This is getting worse and worse. And the administration can't rely just on the cover-ups by the media. It needs distractions. A war scare is, as we've seen throughout the 20th century, the best possible distraction.
You know, speaking of distractions, Carl, you can't help but notice the timing on things. I mean, of course, a lot of people that point these things out are labeled conspiracy theorists. However, I've learned in my life that there are no coincidences, or very few coincidences, and timing is almost 99% everything. A good case in point is how back in the early 1990s, actually starting in the late 80s, the Silverado Savings and Loan and the savings and loan corruption and scandals that was going on during that was kind of a prelude to the 2008 financial crisis. But nevertheless, at least it was dealt with somewhat back then. But one of the main principal figures in this one bank, savings and loan called Silverado Savings and Loan, was Neil Bush,
Yep.
George Herbert H. Walker Bush's son. And it was so interesting is just when there was congressional hearings starting to investigate, Neil Bush was summoned, was subpoenaed to testify before the U.S. Congress. Lo and behold, all of a sudden, the first Gulf War starts. I mean, it was that quick. It was in a matter of days to a week. I mean, so this is age-old tactic. Or Bill Clinton, when the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke, the very next day there was a cruise missile launched that hit a pharmaceutical plant in the Sudan. They said it was a weapon that was making biological warfare agents, and it was only less than a week when they found out that that was a total lie.
It was a flat lie, yes.
And it was a total distraction. In fact, it was really weird is the fact there was a film that came out called Wag the Dog. Great film. I highly recommend it with Dustin Hoffman and Robert De Niro, which is a film about how the various elements in the government, intelligence agencies, and their consultants in the media use media techniques to deceive the American people. And that film came out the day that missile was launched. I mean, it was just that was a coincidence, but it was a pretty uncanny one, and it was it was quite interesting how that film dealt with just the subject of what they were actually doing as far as their manipulation and their distraction techniques.
Thank you, David. This is Aware on the Air, and that's a nice lead in to what I want to talk about for the next minute or two. The message sent by America's invisible victims. That's the title of a piece by Glenn Greenwald that appeared in The Guardian in London this week. Glenn Greenwald, who's an American and lives for legal reasons in Brazil and writes for legal reasons, we might say, in a British newspaper, because you're not going to get this sort of account very easily in the American press. The subtitle of his article is, "As 2 more Afghan children are liberated from their lives by NATO this weekend, a new film examines the effects of endless U.S. aggression." Sadly enough, even after he wrote this piece, there was another account of a U.S.-led airstrike in Afghanistan that killed 5 Afghans, 4 of them children. So the war on children, Barack Obama's war on children, continues. We have a child killer in the White House who's adopted the traditional American death squad approach to politics back to the Kennedy administration in Latin America, and indeed has expanded it. But Greenwald talks about a new film that we have mentioned here before, but from all the preliminary accounts, it's something we all of us should take a look at. The film is called Dirty Wars, and it's based upon the investigation of journalist Jeremy Scahill. His work has been mentioned here, and other people who actually talk about what's going on in America's war in the Middle East frequently. But this film by Scahill, it's directed by Richard Raleigh, is an investigation of Americans' global covert war under President Obama, and especially his ever-growing kill list. Greenwald calls it one of the most important things I've seen in years, gripping and emotionally affecting in the extreme, with remarkable news-breaking revelations even for those of us who have intensely followed these issues. The film won awards at Sundance and rave reviews in unlikely places, such as Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. Before we went on the air, we were talking about a series of movies and indeed television shows that have been for a while, that have been around for a while, that we look back now and see remarkable political dimensions and indeed American regime supporting political dimensions that deserve to be commented on. I think particularly of Zero Dark 30 and Argo. I pointed out I usually call it Agro, and I get that wrong. Argo, that these films are part of the Hollywood movie industry at the moment. This Dirty Wars film is something different. This is new. The most propagandistic aspect of the U.S. war on terror has been and remains that its victims are rendered invisible and voiceless. They're almost never named by the newspapers. They and their surviving family members are virtually never heard from on television. The Bush and Obama Departments of Justice have collaborated with federal judges to ensure that even those who everyone admits are completely innocent have no access to American courts and thus no means of having their stories heard or their rights vindicated. There are people in Guantanamo who have been there for 10 years now, and the U.S. has no intention of trying them because it has no case against them, but it can't let them out because of the bad press that would result. Radical secrecy theories and escalating attacks on whistleblowers push these victims further into the dark. Glenn Greenwald writes that it's the ultimate tactic of othering, concealing, making them into an other, concealing their humanity, enabling their dehumanization by simply relegating them to non-existence in our consciousness, non-existence in our media. As Ashley Banfield put it in her 2003 speech denouncing U.S. media coverage of the Iraq War, just months before she was demoted and then fired by MSNBC, U.S. media reports systematically exclude both the perspectives of the other side and the victims of American violence. Media outlets in predominantly Muslim countries certainly report on their plight, but U.S. media outlets simply do not, which is one major reason for the disparity in worldviews between the two populations. They know what the U.S. does in their part of the world, but Americans are kept deliberately ignorant of it. What makes Dirty Wars, the new Scahill movie, so important is that it viscerally conveys the effects of U.S. militarism on these invisible victims by letting them speak for themselves. Scahill and his crew travel to the places most U.S. journalists are unwilling or unable to go, to remote and dangerous provinces in Afghanistan, Yemen, and Somalia, all to give voice to the victims of U.S. aggression. We hear from the Afghans whose family members, including 2 pregnant women, were slaughtered by U.S. Special Forces in 2010 in the Paktia province, despite being part of the Afghan police, only for NATO to outright lie and claim the women were already dead from honor killings by these sorts of people by the time the American troops had arrived. In fact, the U.S. Special Forces, U.S. death squads, had killed them and killed them purposely and knew what they were doing. But the story, the lie, covered it. I mean, back to the missile gap, if you like. Lies, of course, were uncritically repeated in the U.S. media outlets. It's rare when the truth breaks through these lies, but sometimes it does. Scahill interviews the still traumatized survivors of the U.S. cruise missile and cluster bomb attack in southern Yemen that killed 35 women and children just weeks after Obama was awarded the 2009 Nobel Peace Prize. And once again, let's be clear, that was a choice by the Obama administration with no legal justification. We see the widespread anger in Yemen over the fact that the Yemeni journalist who first exposed U.S. responsibility for that attack, Abdullah Haider Sheh, was not only arrested by the U.S. puppet regime, but as Scahill first reported, has been kept imprisoned to this very day at the direct insistence of President Obama. President Obama has directed the Yemen government to keep this guy in jail because he told the story about the attack that Obama ordered in Yemen just after he got the Peace Prize. The guy rots in jail as a result. We hear from the grandfather of 16-year-old American teenager Abdulrahman al-Awlaki. He's also the father of U.S. cleric Anwar al-Awlaki. Both before and after a CIA drone killed his son, and then 2 weeks later his teenage grandson, who everyone acknowledges had nothing to do with terrorism. We hear boastful tales of summary executions from U.S.-funded and directed Somali warlords. And unfortunately, the news this week has even more information about a new American-run torture jail in Iraq. There is an unmistakable and singular message sent by these disparate groups and events. It's one particularly worth thinking about, with news reports this week that 2 more Afghan children have been killed by a NATO air attack, and 4 more in the report yesterday. The message is the U.S. is viewed as the greatest threat, and it is U.S. aggression and violence far more than any other cause that motivates support for al-Qaeda and anti-American sentiment. The son of the slain Afghan police commander, who's the husband of one of the killed pregnant women and brother of the other, says that villagers refer to U.S. Special Forces as the American Taliban, and that he refrained from putting on a suicide belt and attacking U.S. soldiers with it only because of the pleas of his grieving siblings. This is all in the film. You can hear this testimony. An influential Southern Yemeni cleric explains that he never heard of al-Qaeda sympathizers in his country until that 2009 cruise missile attack and subsequent drone killings, including the one that ended the life of Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, a claim supported by all sorts of data. The brutal Somali warlord explains that the Americans are the masters of war, who taught him everything he knows and who fuel the ongoing conflict. Anwar al-Awlaki's transformation from moderate and peace-preaching American cleric to angry critic of the U.S. is shown to have begun with the U.S. attack on Iraq and then rapidly intensifying with Obama's drone attacks and kill lists. Meanwhile, U.S. military officials and officers interviewed by Scahill exhibit a sociopathic indifference to their victims, while al-Awlaki's increasingly angry sermons in defense of jihad are juxtaposed with a very similar sounding justification of endless war from Obama. The evidence has long been compelling that the primary fuel of what the U.S. calls terrorism are the very policies of aggression justified in the name of stopping terrorism. The vast bulk of those who have been caught in recent years attempting attacks on the U.S. have emphatically cited U.S. militarism and drone killings in their part of the world as their motive. Evidence is overwhelming that what has radicalized huge numbers of previously peaceful and moderate Muslims is growing rage at seeing a continuous stream of innocent victims, including children, at the hands of the seemingly endless U.S. commitment to violence. It's the U.S. that wants this war. The only way this clear truth is concealed is by preventing Americans from knowing about, let alone hearing from, the victims of U.S. aggression. That concealment is what caused huge numbers of Americans to wander around in a daze after 9/11, innocently and bewilderingly wondering, why do they hate us? Despite decades of continuous U.S. interference, aggression, and violence enabling in that part of the world. And it's this concealment of these victims that causes Americans now to react to endless stories of the killing of innocent Muslims with the excuse that, quote, we have to do something about the terrorists, or it's better than a ground invasion, without realizing that they're affirming what Chris Hayes aptly describes as a false choice, and worse, without realizing that the very policies they're cheering are not stopping the terrorists at all, but doing the opposite, helping the existing terrorists and creating new ones. To be fair, it's not difficult to induce a population to avert its eyes from the victims of the violence they support. We all like to believe that we're good and peaceful people, and we particularly like to believe this about the leaders we elect, cheer, and admire. Moreover, what the Nigerian-American writer Teju Kole recently described as the empathy gap, the failure to imagine how others will react to a situation that would cause us, and have caused us, to be driven by rage and violence, means that the U.S. government need not work all that hard to silence its victims. There's a pervasive desire to keep them out of sight. Nonetheless, if Americans are going to support or even tolerate endless militarism, as they have been doing, then they should at least have to be confronted with their victims, if not on moral grounds, then on pragmatic ones, to understand the effects of these policies. Based on the out-of-sight, out-of-mind reality, the U.S. government and media have been incredibly successful in rendering those victims silent and invisible. Dirty Wars, the new movie, is a truly crucial tonic to that propaganda. At the very least, nobody who sees it and hears from the victims of U.S. aggression will ever again wonder why there are so many people in the world who believe in the justifiability or even necessity of violence against the U.S. That's Glenn Greenwald talking about Jeremy Scahill's new movie, Dirty Wars. There's a book associated with it, too, from Scahill's reporting. All of that should appear soon. I don't know yet where and when the film will be shown here in town, but it certainly should be, and we'll continue to talk about it here on Aware in the Air. Comments, gentlemen?
You know, Carl, it's interesting because I remember back in the 80s when there was all the conflict going on in Central America, how there was a quote somewhere, and I can't remember where I saw it, but basically it says, according to the current U.S. foreign policy, that time was under Ronald Reagan's presidency, any U.S.-backed dictator is called a Democrat, and anyone who opposes the dictator is a communist.
That's right.
And I think we have a similar type of scenario today, that supposedly the U.S. Military, the government of the United States, controlled by the elite 1%, that does not represent the 99% of the American people, their actions in the world to try to gain more wealth, more natural resources, more cheap labor to enrich them, but not the American people, is considered spreading democracy and progress. And anybody that opposes that is a terrorist. I think it's the same kind of black and white oversimplification propaganda that was used back in the Reagan administration in the 1980s. Same people, not the very same people, sometimes so, but the same type of people. Those that are driving our country to the ground, disenfranchising the American people, keeping the American people in the dark as much as possible in order to benefit the 1%.
So aren't you being unpatriotic if you're not preparing to fight these dictators, these madmen abroad?
That's right.
You know, I'll pick my own enemies and I'll pick my own battles, and I think that's how most Americans feel about this. The only reason they're able to get so many young men and women in the military is because of the horrible state of the economy. You look at most working class people, young people today, they don't have the money to go to college or the universities because it's become so prohibitively expensive. So it's like most options are you either have the money to go to the university or to junior college, or there's always the military. And if that doesn't work out, I guess there's always a prison if you happen to fall between the cracks and do something desperate to try to survive.
And we should underline again the fact that these war scares, and more than scares, by the United States occur after a generation of particularly vicious class war in the United States, in which the 1%, as we've learned to call them recently, the 1% have attacked those social supports that they were forced to concede in the previous generation, in the generation after the Second World War. And so we find President Obama and his supposed opponents in the Republican Party all together agreeing that an assault on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid is exactly what's necessary. Hey, the economy demands it, when what they actually mean is that the 1% for whom they're working is demanding it. And as people begin to realize just what's being done to them, even by the leaders that they supposedly elected to take care of them on these matters, we need a distraction. And war is the best distraction. The Kennedy administration that we were talking about earlier constructed death squads for Latin America and spread military rule throughout Latin America in processes that are direct ancestor of the sorts of things the Obama administration is doing with its worldwide assassination program now. War and the economy are essentially connected by a government that has the interests not of the 99% at its heart, but the interests of the 1%. And they're acting for that, and the more Americans realize the more Americans who realize that they're acting for it and that something must be done in response, the better chance we have to stop these horrific events.
One last thing, Carl. You know, it's amazing, despite the relentless 24/7 slick propaganda of the corporate media in this country, that the majority of the American people, I mean, close to 2/3, oppose these wars.
Yes.
So now a lot of people, I think we might have come to a point, I mean, more people need to find out the truth, and
Right.
I think more of the truth, because that, of course, will make it seem more urgent like it should be. But then the question becomes, people that are aware of what exists, they don't like it, what are they going to do about it? I mean, that's kind of like the next step here.
People are not fools, and in spite of the most sophisticated propaganda system that has ever existed in the world, the American media system, in spite of that, the administration is desperately afraid of the American populace, up to the point of arming its Department of Homeland Security in really fantastic ways, apparently. Americans know that. They know that the government is, in fact, afraid of the people. But what they don't know is the details of why they're afraid of the people and what indeed should be done to make sure that the government reverses the policies which are not in the interests of the vast majority of Americans and others around the world. You've been watching Aware on the Air, presented by the members and friends of the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana. This has been the program for the 14th week of 2013. In the last segment of the program, we'll bring you a video or two on the events we've been talking about. We want to remind you that there are other programs like ours here on Urbana Public Television, now streaming online at urbanapublictelevision.org, and thank our director and producer, Jason Liggett, for his work. Our programs are available on YouTube and on Facebook. You can search for Aware on the Air. This is Carl Estabrook for Ron Zoke, Karen Evans-Levy, Stuart Levy, David Johnson, and other members and friends of Aware, saying in the words of the late Edward Murrow, good night and good luck.